I was thinking about getting into this thought of this 20-minute a day practice and how we sometimes feel like we don't have time, and the importance of what it is and what we should see. So the last time my last week's brain hack was all about the sleep and how practices help sleep. And I think it was the one before that I did phase 1 and 2, and I really talked about what the practices are. But what I want to dig into today is being able to see that those practices are actually creating significant shift for us. I've been talking about this with a lot of people this week, and people tend to get confused on like I'll have people come to me and say, I've been doing my practices, but it's not making a difference. And the truth is if we're doing the right practices, it can't not make a difference. So one of the concepts I use to relate that is the concept of going to the gym. So there are a couple of things I say about this all of the time, and that is that if you go to the gym so we can all know that going to the gym, if I go to the gym and I lift heavy weights that are heavy for me to pick up, and I do that repeatedly, that my muscles will get stronger. Now, at no point will we go to the gym and say, well, I'm lifting really heavy weights and I'm lifting them repeatedly, but my muscles aren't getting any stronger. There might be some rare condition that would cause this, but this is still going to be histamine related. So when it comes to the brain, it's the same thing. We need to think of it as working a muscle. So there are two things we need to make sure we clarify in our mind. And the first is that knowing about brain function, knowing about the practices, understanding how this works, will not alter the brain function. Now, I have a lot of people that when they start coming to the groups initially, they experience significant shift. So when they first watch that Intro to Brain Chemistry, again, that is available in an individual video that's about an hour and a half long that you can watch, or that it's on YouTube. The videos 1 through 9. You'll see 1 of 1, 2 of... In fact, at the end of this video, you'll see a link. And if you make sure you pause the video before it shuts off, that link is there where you can link to subscribe to the channel or to check out those brain chemistry videos to learn the details of what I'm talking about. Now, we will feel better when we get information. This is what a lot of processes are, that once we know and understand why a thing is happening, then we can feel better, but we won't have any not real significant change. And so one of the things I say to people all the time when I use this gym analogy, if we think of these practices as strengthening a muscle in the brain, then just knowing about it won't change it. Like, for example, if I know that if I know for a fact that if I go to the gym and lift heavy weights that my muscles will get stronger, that won't make my muscles stronger. I actually need to go to the gym and lift the weights. Knowing it won't be enough. So one of the things is that people do see a significant shift in consciousness, because it's consciousness we're dealing with, just knowing about it. But it is not going to be enough to alter conditions. We need to work the muscle. However, we also need to know that working the muscle is as inevitable to growth as going to the gym and lifting weights to make our muscles stronger. So one of the things that's really valuable for us to know in this is that if I am not seeing significant improvement every week, I am doing a practice inaccurately, or I am not doing the right practice for me. So the important thing we need to know is that the practice needs to be something to challenge the brain. So when we're talking about, I want to start with phase one, even though phase one is a little bit different, but we had a really good conversation about this on Sunday, and I want to dig into it a little deeper. And that is that in phase one, the reason why it is so important to observe our reaction to chemical is so that we can recognize where we are and so we can measure our improvement. So if you have, for example, if you have anxiety, if you're a person that has a lot of anxiety, let's use both ends of the spectrum. Say you're either a person with anxiety or you're a person with high levels of stress. So what I want you to do is think about the ways that you feel anxiety and stress. Connect with it. If you have anxiety, do your muscles feel tense? Do you have shortness of breath, where maybe you don't breathe, you hold your breath a little bit when you have the anxiety? Or do you have do you actually shake, or do you get nervous sweat? Or there are a lot of symptoms of anxiety. So say for that, or on the other end of the spectrum for depression, if you feel lethargic or lack of motivation, or like you just don't care about things, okay? If you recognize that state of consciousness as a state of fight or flight trigger, so if you're recognizing that, oh, the anxiety or the depression are the results of those chemicals being released, then anytime you're anxious or stressed, you'll go, oh, I know that I have this condition. I'm going through this experience of life, so that must mean I'm in this state of consciousness. Doing a practice should alter that state of consciousness. Now, the big thing is, and this is what most people miss about phase one, is they spend their life still externalizing certain things and thinking they should be inherent. And we do this a lot in trying to convince others of why we're upset. So let's use some examples here. Say your car gets broken into and something that you value a lot is stolen. Now, a lot of people would assume that it's inherent to get upset about this. A lot of people assume that everyone would be upset. And this is why we'll go tell everyone what happens to us and say, aren't you so upset with me? Aren't you so upset? Are you going to commiserate with me? Because we've been trained at some point in our life that this is how we react when something like this happens. But it is not inherent to everybody. There are a lot of people that wouldn't react. If people feel they have plenty, they can just go replace the item, they may not react. If people don't feel threatened by it, they may not react. Now, it doesn't mean we're at fault for reacting, but we one of the biggest mistakes that people make that hold them back in this process is believing that certain conditions of life or certain states cause inherent outcome, cause everybody would feel this way or everybody thinks this. And the biggest issue of this is the fact that we then externalize our power. Because we say, anytime I have my car broken into, I am going to get upset. And the truth is, if somebody breaks in your car, getting upset isn't going to make any difference. It's not going to bring back the lost items. It's not going to make you feel better. It's not going to make the other person feel bad who maybe is the one that broke into your car because they were triggered. It doesn't have any beneficial outcome. A lot of people have asked me about processing emotions, and I adamantly insist we do not need to process emotions. They don't become repressed. They don't linger with us. If we're shrinking the amygdala, quite literally go away. So many people attach processing emotion to feeling better. And the truth is, we don't feel better until we're out of the emotion. There is a point where we can exhaust ourselves and we can use and feel so much emotion that we are finally exhausted of it, and then we have the breakthrough after. But the truth is, the re-engaging of the prefrontal cortex is what makes us feel better. And so to demand, if we tell ourselves that processing emotion makes us feel better, I just need to cry this out, or I just need to go ahead and rage for a minute, that's keeping us in that condition. So there are so many different areas I can go into. I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes, but there are so many different areas I can go into where we are not giving the chemical and the brain function credit for the way we're experiencing life. And this is the biggest thing. This is what people do. And I hear this all the time. They'll say, oh, I had this thought or this epiphany, and then it made everything better. That's not the order how things occur. The right brain function was triggered, which brought the thought and the better feeling. Both the thought and the feeling are the byproduct of the brain function. So we tend to put ourselves in these arduous journeys because we externalize everything. We externalize all our triggers. And like I said, to an extent, that does have an impact, to the extent that if a certain thing, external thing happens, it could trigger our brain. But the trigger is not inherent to the thing. The trigger is inherent to the rule in the amygdala that triggers the fight or flight response that creates that outcome. So if we can get ourselves to the point where we see that. So today is really about doing that 20 minutes of practice. Today's focus is really about doing that 20 minutes. The problem is if we're trying to do 20 minutes in an area where we're not capable, we're not going to progress as well. But if we don't invest the time to do sufficient practices in observing our emotional states and connecting those to chemicals, none of the rest of the phases are going to be easy. The phases are so much easier when we can connect and say, oh, no matter what I feel, if I feel bliss, if I feel anger, if I feel fear, if I feel calm, if I feel neutral, these are all certain brain functions. And so if I'm not correlating those two items, I need to make sure I'm doing part of my practice of observation. So what I want to do is talk about two specific things that are critical to creating a really strong practice here. The first of those things is the feeling observation log. If you have never read the book, or either the practices book or some of the old books I used to pass out in my meetups, there are free downloads on my website. So if you go to the inspiredevolutionproject.com and go to store, underneath there you'll see 3 different options. There's phase 1 practice sheets, phase 2 practice sheets, and phase 3 practice sheets. I recommend downloading the phase 1 practice sheets and observing your feelings every day until you never think anything is inherent, until no matter what happens in your life and no matter what emotional response you see, you go, it's a chemical. If I meet someone and like them and fall in love, it's a chemical. If someone dies in my life and I'm sad, it's a chemical. If someone breaks in my car and steals something, it's a chemical. If I get upset, it's a chemical. If I get angry because someone cut me off in traffic. It's a chemical. All of it is a chemical. And what we're talking about doing in this program, in this method, is gaining enough control of the chemical that we don't ever need to be in those states of suffering, those emotional or mental or physical states of suffering, because we're able to adjust the chemical. So ultimately, what our goal is to be able to, at any point in time, say, okay, what am I feeling? Oh, what chemical is that? What brain function is causing that? And I don't tie it to just the chemical or just a singular brain function, because they're also intertwined, and that's why I use states of consciousness. And so it's understanding when I'm in a fight or flight state, when I'm in a rest and digest state, when I'm in a thriving state, when I'm in a striding state. I should be able to recognize all of those individual states at any point in time. So the goal of that first log is to observe yourself. So one of the 20-minute practices I recommend for everyone, and if you don't have this locked down, if you ever think your feelings are beyond your control, if you ever think that your thoughts are controlling things, or if you ever are at the point where you feel like you don't know why things are happening, things like that, I recommend this as part of your practice, and that is print out the feeling observation log, and when you're going to do your 20 minutes of practice, pause. Ask yourself how you're feeling, and then say, what brain function is this? If you don't have an immediate answer, then you're not able to set up to start your practice in the right way. You need to be able to stop and observe yourself for just a moment to be able to decide where you are, so you know which practice to do anyway. And this also lends itself to your brain becoming used to observing itself. So one of the things you can do to add to your practice is think of your day. Instead of just in that moment, how am I feeling? Use your feeling observation log and think of 2 or 3 times during the day. When I woke up this morning, or when I left to go to work, or when I ran into that person on the street I hadn't seen in a while, or when I was at the grocery store. So think to all the things that you are doing throughout the day. So when you go to do your log, just think of different moments, either from today or from yesterday if you do it in the morning, and say, okay, in that moment, what state of consciousness was I in? Or what was the feeling, and then what state of consciousness? Get in the habit of doing, I would recommend at least 3 at the beginning of every practice. If you don't already have established that 100% of the time, whatever I'm thinking, whatever I'm feeling, whatever I'm experiencing is my reality, is the byproduct of a brain function. If you don't have that locked down, this is a really good thing to add to your practices. The second thing is make sure you have that phase 2 practice list. That's also available on the website there. You can see the phase 1 list, and then there's a phase 2 list. Make sure you have that. And when you're doing your 20 minutes, give it your full attention. This is so important. This is what I started with when I was talking, is that there are so many people that say, oh, I'm doing practices and not seeing results. And again, that's because the practice isn't challenging the brain enough. The brain, it needs to be really focused, intentional, hard to do when you're doing phase 2. It's something where it needs to take your full concentration and your full attention. And if you do not find yourself feeling better, if not in that moment, then week by week, if you're doing 20 minutes of actual practice to challenge your brain and you're not feeling better every week, we need to do a tweak. There needs to be an adjustment to what you're doing. So having that list of phase 2 practices, if one doesn't work, you can start trying other practices. You can start trying to find the thing that really challenges your brain. And then remember to keep it to 20 minutes. If it's truly challenging your brain, more than 20 minutes is going to feel tedious anyway. So it's really good to keep it to 20 minutes. If you want to do longer practices, so if you're like, well, I want to do an hour's worth of practice a day, split it up. Do 20 minutes at a time. Do 20 minutes in the morning, maybe midday, and again in the evening. And then give your brain a break. And let that be the only thing it needs to do. We have other responsibilities in life, but sometimes we burden ourselves with so many practices that we disconnect because the brain gets overwhelmed. And then we end up doing no practices instead of so many practices. So it's really important for us to be able to connect with making sure we're doing the right practices in the right way and that we're doing our full 20 minutes every day. What I often suggest to people is to challenge me, prove me wrong, find the right practice, make sure you're feeling the shift, and see if in a month you don't feel exponentially better than you could have ever imagined. You can't, when we do these practices the right way, we can't even imagine what the good is going to feel like because it's a good we've never felt before. We're talking about altering the brain. So we're talking about you starting to have experiences you've never had before that are amazing, brilliant, joyful experiences, and living from that state where you feel calm and centered and grounded all the time, not just in states of meditation, even when someone cuts you off on the freeway, or even surprisingly, all of a sudden there's a point where someone breaks in your car and you're like, you know what? She was right. I'm not really reacting that strongly. This is the progress we want to see. Otherwise, there's not a point to doing a program if we're not seeing high benefit from it. To time and resources, we work hard for our time and resources. I mean, we're all given 24 hours in a day, but we have to decide how we're going to spend it. And then we do all this hard work for our resources. So these are important, and to invest ourselves in something that's going to give us significant results in shorter amounts of times is highly valuable. So make sure you get that full benefit. That's what I promise with what I'm teaching. So make sure you get the full benefit of that. So again, add observation. Even if it's just for a couple weeks, even if you're all the way to phase 4, just give yourself and say, you know what, I am going to observe for a couple weeks and see if I do attribute my reactions more to external things than I do to the function of my own brain. And let me focus on doing some practices that specifically target noticing change in that area. So I'm over my 20 minutes, but this is so important. I want to make sure people get it, because if we can get through these early stages of these early phases and we can get through them in the right way, what can become of that is absolutely amazing. But it is going to be a lot easier and come a lot faster if we're willing to take the time here to make sure we lay a strong foundation. So again, I will be doing an extended video for the meetup group Inspired Evolution Project. If you're not a member, you can go to Google and search Inspired Evolution Project Meetup. The first month is free, and there is a ton of content. In fact, there are coupons on there for classes, and there are a couple more things I'm going to be adding this week. I'm not going to give them away, but there are a couple things I'm going to be adding, but there's also these extended videos. So if you really like what you're getting out of that Brain Hacks and you want more, that's the place to get it. There will be about another 20-minute video on this topic that goes into a bit more detail. So I think that's everything. If you ever have any questions, go ahead and post them in comments and I will answer them just as soon as possible. In the meantime, 20 minutes. Don't forget to do your practices. It may seem like some days you're like, I just don't want to do it, but the benefit is extraordinary, especially if we do it every day. It does become cumulative. So again, I hope everybody has an amazing rest of your day. And however you decide to move forward, I do wish you tremendous success on your journey.